Hey, this is Dave Donenfeld with my partner Mark Stanwyck from Avalaunch, and today we're fortunate enough to have none other than Coop from Fief Guild. Welcome. I'm glad you can make some time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Sure thing. I recently have I've been a little late to the party in terms of the rise of the guild. Obviously, all the P2P, all the gaming stuff that's blown up, it's been kind of hard to miss. But I think what's helpful, at least for viewers and myself included, is to kind of start from a real high level. What essentially gave rise to the guild? The guild is essentially an aggregating of resources and skills and talents in order to optimize earnings. If you could just kind of start in there from an expert standpoint, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, so the rise of guilds came with play to earn starting to rise, especially on Ethereum. And a lot of guilds, what they do is focus on a single game, acquiring some assets for that game, and then having people manage and run those assets to make yield for the guild. Or they form a scholarship model, which is people come with assets in hand, and then the guild is basically in charge of finding others to play with those assets. So you could almost think of it like outsourcing the, the play part of any play to earn and helping the teams optimize that play to earn experience. So that's really the main way people think of guilds, but ours is a little different. We're focusing on the economic part of this GameFi evolution. So can
And
I go into that?
let me ask you, by the economic standpoints, it's not just the actual play to earn, but the assets, right?
Right. It's the
Okay.
assets, it's building protocols around assets. Like if you look at the way a lot of these items have been traded and tokens are managed, it's with DeFi tools that are built specifically around DeFi. So you use your traditional DEX or an NFT marketplace, and a lot of those just aren't optimized for the research that you would do in a GameFi perspective. So we want to build the tools that people use to trade these assets essentially and to optimize them through lending, through staking, et cetera, all through the lens of a gamer essentially.
And what is the research that's entailed?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with NFTs, you know, like a lot of it's art, right? And you go and you
Right.
can look at that asset and that's all you need. You just want to look at it. It looks cool. You like it. It feels good for who you are and you buy it. But in the GameFi space, it's a lot more about yield. It's about how does this asset plug into the assets that I already have in a way that might create synergies. So, you know, adding a crab from Crabata that's of a certain faction might benefit you more than just any old crab. So building in knowledge directly into your marketplace that helps a user understand all those pieces is going to help them make those buying decisions.
That makes sense. So could you kind of walk me through an example with Thief of how this might sort of come into play, where you're like, hey, these are our assets. This is how we determine that they belong here, and this is how we deploy them.
Yeah, I want to take a step back and say that, like, especially at the start, we're not going to acquire our own assets initially.
Mm,
It's a lot of just enabling others to trade those assets. But I think Crabata is a good example because it's so big on Avalanche. So helping a user understand their team that they currently have and what might fit that team as a good next addition. So you might have a page along with each asset that explains the possible synergies, the possible strategies that go along with your team, instead of just leaving it up to them to try to figure that out.
and before the guilds were formalized, did teams come together at all?
Yeah, well, in the olden days, like before
Yeah,
guilds, yes, yeah, that was the onset of guilds. Really, was people
right.
just doing this informally, realizing that there's a lot of power in grouping up and figuring out these strategies together, and then they became guilds.
And how did they determine sort of the how are like the earnings distributed? Like if I join a team, can you be sort of like the scrub and then the ringer? Is it does it work like that at all?
It does, yeah. You have your scholars and the managers of those scholars. So essentially, like the people with the assets are, treated a little higher than the people actually running and managing the assets. And some of the guilds do this through protocols that actually hold on to the assets and distribute them for use, and others don't. So we've seen some DAOs on Avalaunch start to take off where they just have a lot of crabs and they're running that. And then they're telling you that they're paying you the rewards through an NFT that you own. So there's all sorts of levels to it. But what it comes down to and why it's not efficient in our mind is that you're essentially managing people. You're setting up a structure to have low level players run all of these assets, and anyone who's built a company knows that that's like one of the hardest parts of scaling, right? Is finding those people to actually run the part that you need. And so we don't essentially like that model. And that's why we want to focus more on building the tools to enable GameFi instead of a scholarship model where we're managing a lot of people.
Right. So the hierarchy sort of becomes centralized in a way where someone has to kind of put the pieces together.
Yeah, yeah. In some cases, yes.
And how does Fief sort of remove itself from that fray and kind of rise above it by this structural composition?
Well, we start with like our IGM NFTs essentially give you access to the guild and ownership of the guild in a way, and from there it's going to be pretty naturally decentralized in that we build a protocol. The fees generated by that protocol go back out to owners of IGM NFTs and stakers of Fief, and it's hands off at a certain point.
And I've almost seen, without exception, and if you go into traditional gaming, they're basically all kind of agree that the two token economy is the way to go. That there's almost no way to sort of run everything under, let's say, an Apex token and drive value. I think originally that can look a little bit opportunistic. Can you kind of explain how this, we have the wood, we have the Fief, how they interact and why they kind of need each other for support?
Yeah, so now we're getting into the game Blood and Coin, and really first off, I'm going to introduce Blood and Coin. It's our first game, and it's essentially meant to build up our own internal economy, and then also as a way to spur use of the protocols that we build. So every action in Blood and Coin is on our protocols as a way to test them, as a way to get users used to them, all of that. And so with Wood, that's the first resource of Blood and Coin. It's the base level, like it's needed to build everything on top of it, essentially. And the way to get access to Wood is going to be primarily through using Fief. So we use Fief to acquire Wood. Wood then is combined again with Fief at later times to build on top of itself and to generate deeper items into the game, more valuable items.
So the wood is essentially like the crafting token, right? It's the thing you need to do stuff.
Right, exactly.
And how does yeah, could you say more on that?
Yeah, it's the first one. I think we see opportunities to have other layers, other resources that will be used to build other items that go into a new protocol that we build. But it's the first.
And in terms of, like, when you say items, what are you specifically referring to?
Yeah. So to get a little deeper, you have a
Yeah.
character, and
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. Like that, we're building things for gamers. They love the RPG aspect of having a character that you deck out with items that enhance your ability to do X, Y, Z. And for now, a lot of it's just around this internal game. So you take wood and build a hatchet. And then that
Right.
hatchet is going to allow you to, well, first off, you can trade it, you can sell it, but ultimately it's allowing your character to level up in a way that will benefit you when you use the protocols.
And when your character levels up, I mean, I know this is kind of the obvious gaming stuff, but it's worth sort of pointing out within your framework. What does that mean? Like, you level up. Like, I have a hatchet, I got an impenetrable shield. I'm a little tricked out. Like, what does that
Yeah,
actually mean to me?
eventually it will mean differences in the user experience on a protocol, especially when it comes to fees and access to deeper items. So in order to buy the next best thing, you have to have a decked out character, essentially.
Right. That makes sense.
And all of this is really coming back to the idea that it's building use of the protocols, and it's not the end game of everything Fief does. Like, this is the spurring of that internal economy, the testing, the training of users, and ultimately the end game is to use third-party assets on all of these protocols, right? So this is just the preamble to an open market.
And let me ask you, when you guys sort of came together and said, look, let's do this guild thing right, what do you think, and you alluded to it earlier a bit, but what were sort of the pain points that Fief identified and said we can do better?
The pain points are definitely around that management experience of scholarship guilds, like that. Like I said, just super inefficient, and there's room for something else. The second aspect was that our two core co-founders were managing assets in the metaverse space and feeling like it was a very centralized experience that not everyone benefited from. So they wanted to bring that into a decentralized world. And then the last one was really just that everyone is using these DeFi protocols that don't consider the gamer. And because, to be fair, there wasn't a whole lot of GameFi activity. Oh, I got a major background. Yeah, sorry. To be fair, there wasn't a lot of GameFi activity at the time. So, of course, there were just regular dexes. But the idea that people would just continue using typical DeFi products for these assets that clearly had a different type of life was really obvious to them.
And what do you mean by a different type of life?
Well, like I was saying earlier, the things that you need to consider when buying an asset in GameFi are so different than what you consider with just a token or just an NFT. So mainly that's what I mean. And then secondarily, it's, you know, your audience a whole lot better. We're just starting to get into the niche DeFi products, in my opinion. It's right. Like GameFi is one of these niches where we know our audience loves gaming. What can we do with that? How can we make a protocol that appeals to them because we know who they are? And maybe in a year's time, we see another niche pop up that is totally different. So I see it as sort of DeFi niches evolving.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've, you know, I mean, in dealing with you guys over the course of a few months now, I mean, it's a pretty nimble team. Like, you guys are constantly rethinking and adjusting. So is it fair to say that, you know, a pain point, at least from what I've identified, is that nobody in anything related to crypto seems to be able to stay on top of the trends, kind of look around the corner and actually implement?
Yes.
Is that, yeah, like, can you guys give us something there with your thought process? Because like I said, if you're, and just following the chats, it's just been this continuous kind of like updating, rethinking, and then actual institution of features. So it's been interesting.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's different, and I love it. I think it's really important, given the space we're in. Some projects come out with that first roadmap and stick to it all the way, whether it's the best or not. And I think that's definitely not our approach. We want to change and pivot with whatever's happening in the economy, whatever's happening in GameFi, et cetera. And I think one of the ways that we're going to be able to do that well is through community. So there's this other aspect of most guilds, which is that they focus on a single game, and it gives them like one, if that game fails, you know, that's it. They're not really looking to be nimble in the space. They're looking to maximize their opportunity within a single game. So with us not focusing on a single game, we're able to have a broader view of things, and our community is a really big aspect of that. Like, we've opened up our Discord and started to reward users for doing research, and we're paying out like small sums in exchange for them going out and giving us a full rundown of new protocols, new games, etc. And so it's a bit decentralized in that way too, of like decentralized research on GameFi and becoming a knowledge hub for GameFi enables us to make changes.
And how do you, like for us, I mean, just as a launch pad, we have a pretty active community and we go, it's very difficult sometimes to assess, is there consensus on anything? Is it just a reaction to the market? Is it the agenda of somebody? How do you distill all this information? Because I would imagine there's a lot being bandied about in the Discord.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we do focus on our core contributors. We have some people in Discord that consistently provide value and research, and so we take their word higher than someone just popping into Discord with an opinion. So it's sort of building up a group of experts. And then the second part is like our founders have very strong opinions, have a lot of time in this industry, and so they're our last word for the way we go. So we trust them, and we trust the people that are contributing consistently.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny because it's the principles of decentralization are sort of like, let's just level everything, but subject matter expertise does come into play and has to
It
be
does.
considered. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we want it to be decentralized to the extent that it's helpful and useful, but we also acknowledge that there are parts of this that a decision needs to be made by somebody with a lot of expertise, and we're going to do that too when it makes sense.
Got it. Just so you know, Mark's having technical difficulties, so he asked me to apologize, but he had to step out. He'll be back. So it kind of on a philosophical level, it's a pretty interesting thing because you're sort of centralizing decentralization, right? You're like, I'm going to leverage this wisdom of the masses. We're going to hopefully with this kind of, I mean, I like the idea of a less managerial and more tool oriented approach. Like that's an obvious innovation. And from there, you're saying, hey, we can attract some real top resources and some ringers here, but we're not going to do this traditional hierarchical kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're focused more on the economics. Now, if you weren't focused on the economics, what are sort of the alternative things to focus on? Like, what is it that people are doing that's probably not too sensical, I would think?
Well, you could focus on just the assets. There's
Mm,
essentially people that are more like a fund, where they're not even buying play to earn assets. There's a big play in metaverse, like just land. It doesn't
right.
necessarily have to be worked. So you don't have the managerial aspect that you do with a Crabata scholarship guild, but you're acquiring an asset. Maybe it's like land next to Snoop Dogg and,
Right.
whatever. And that's one way, but you're really just hoping that that goes up, right? And the only real benefit to coming together in an organization is to pool funds, and it doesn't really benefit from the community as much.
So in pulling those funds together, is there sort of a collective exit strategy? Like when do you know it's time to, get rid of one asset and go into another?
Well, I think that's part of the problem of being asset focused is
Uh-huh.
that as soon as somebody does make a decision along those lines, you're going to have a portion of the community that strongly disagrees. And if it's a true DAO setup where you're voting on all these things, you're potentially losing your quickness and you're losing the ability to make really smart decisions instead of just popular decisions.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's very problematic. You just sort of see it all the time. And then,
Yeah,
because everything's so public, this laundry gets aired out and it can just really ruin an entire project without
yeah,
a whole lot having to happen.
right.
Right.
And so essentially, we're going to put that pressure on our founders when those times come, instead of a decentralized sort of we voted on it and half the community is upset. It's more of like, here's this strategic decision that we've decided to make based on all of this research, and here's what we're doing.
Got it. So take me back to, the focus on economics, the tokens. Um, we have Fief, obviously, that's the token, and we have Wood. How does Fief function in this universe?
Fief. So wood is that base resource item.
Right.
But along the way, in order to do anything with that resource, you have to have Fief. So the first person to really do anything in this economic game is the farmer. They're like, as you might expect, a farmer in the real world, they're like collecting resources and giving them or selling them to someone else to do something with. So the farmer is going to create wood by staking and essentially burning Fief. So, and then every step along the way, like the farmer, the craftsman, merchant, alchemist, they all consume Fief in order to take the next step in the economy. So it's going to be used significantly alongside wood.
So, in doing and just thinking ahead in terms of what we're doing here together, it's going to essentially be just the sale of wood. So if I'm a participant and I say, okay, thanks for the wood, I want to do something with this now. What's next?
What's next is that they
Yeah.
would stake Fief, use their wood, and essentially turn it into the next resource. So if you don't have an IGM NFT and you just have this wood, you'd want a character, and then the character plus the wood plus a small amount of Fief would allow you to essentially upgrade that into the next step in the economy.
So even smaller participants, because we're the all-inclusive launch pad, it allows them basically to kind of get their foot in the door, and then you say, look, if you have a little bit of fee, if you can go ahead and stake this, and you're on your way to a character, depending on how much you have, how quickly that comes to fruition. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And we want to set that up and to make it more inclusive because people who are looking at our IGM NFTs as the more like ticket into being a part of the guild of like really officially and all the
Hmm.
benefits with that, that's a pretty high price point for some people. It's at $1,500, and
Right.
there's going to be considerable value in that. But at the same time, we don't want it to be a whale only guild. It's this allows us to have entrance at much lower price points.
And what, a bigger question then, how does that, it is a little bit problematic, right? If you're, a newbie in the space, or you're just somebody on a limited budget who wants to get into the play to earn thing, and suddenly you go, I need 7 grand to really do anything here. And you see that, by
Yeah.
dint of success of these games that creates these high entry costs. But is there a way to guard against that? I mean, for us, we're looking at it, we're early. It shouldn't cost too much. You might need a little patience if you're a smaller player to get to where you got to go. But how do you see that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
How, what do you how do you see that sort of unfolding over time with Thief?
Well, with Fief, I think this is the solution is to offer a really low cost way to get a character and get involved, and that's all that you will need to play the initial game. So I think that's our solution. For others, it's a much harder problem, and it really comes down to how you launch and what is required to get started. So like with
So
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, in order to get to sort of the initial NFT phase, that's always going to be relatively accessible. I mean,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. That's
and
that's the goal.
and how does it get so out of hand every other place? I mean, is it just economics?
It is pretty much economics, and I mean a lot of them are starting with very limited bases of NFTs. I think is a big part of it. Like if you looked at Crabata, there were only a couple hundred, couple thousand crabs in existence at the start, and so anyone who thought that this game was going to be really valuable, they're willing to pay, and there's just not more crabs, right? And so I think by offering a higher supply at the start that's readily available at a low price, they're able to start.
Now, I know something that scares people is, wood has unlimited supply, right?
Yeah.
Yet, we're here kind of looking at a value. I mean, we've seen the smooth love potions and some of this other stuff that's been volatile, to say the least. What's the kind of plan with that? It's tough to kind of go, look, I have an unlimited supply token here. I want to sell it to you. How do these two kind of buttress against each other and find their way to make the, retain value, if not increase, obviously?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the rest of the economic game. Like nobody should really be buying wood and holding wood, hoping that it, increases in value. It's really about what else can we do with that asset. So combining it with Fief as a farmer and taking that next step to create an item with it, and the value is in that item instead. And the second thing is I want to come back to the idea that it's spurring the use of these protocols, right? We are ourselves rewarding players um, that get involved. So there's going to be specific quests that each faction might want to accomplish, and there's an actual, AVAX or dollar reward tied to that. And so it's not a game where the game is it, like that's all we have here. It's a game to spur that use and growth. And at the end of it, we're going to be onboarding those third-party assets to add value to the whole system through, something outside, essentially.
Right. So the game is not the end game.
Right. The game is not
Right.
the end game. It's spurring that growth, starting us off, and honestly, as a way to reward users for doing all of that. A big core idea of ours is to make sure that the first people who get involved are rewarded handsomely for doing so, and that they'll help carry us into actual use of the protocols.
Right. And as long as sort of as long as the cost of entry isn't prohibitive, I always say to people, they think if they're, something's 3 weeks old, it's too late.
Yeah.
I mean, like we should be sitting here thinking, I mean, given where crypto is at on, kind of a higher level, you go, if somebody discovers you guys in a year, they should be early.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where kind of the keeping the lower entry costs makes sense. What are the protocols you guys are looking at now? Like where does your focus lie?
The very first is the marketplace for NFT assets. You see that, as the biggest opportunity is people trading GameFi assets without all the information that they need. So that's step one, and that's launching on the 15th of March. So ahead of Wood, that will launch.
And how many people really know how to trade game fee assets? There's like four of you worldwide. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's pretty esoteric.
yeah. I mean, it is, and it's also specific to each game. So a game pops up, and all of a sudden you have 4,000 new people interested in trading that asset.
Mhm.
So we see it as like a quickly growing segment of the NFT market that just isn't fully taken advantage of yet.
What's your feeling on the NFT market overall? I mean, obviously we saw this massive spike that got a little silly. Now we're seeing some pullback, calling for end of days, but if it's not, like, what's your kind of take on the whole market at right now?
Yeah, my take is that each individual NFT collection is just extremely speculative, and it's all about the community behind it. Um, and so when I'm looking at NFTs, it's from a community lens and what can they really add? What are they going to do together? Is it merch? Is it building something? Is it creating more art kind of thing? And that, the truth is that a lot of NFT collections are going to just kind of fall apart. But that the NFT technology as a whole is what we like. That idea that an asset can be used across multiple games because it's owned on chain and instead of in a specific game engine, that's the power that we really believe in, and we'll see continue to grow.
Yeah, so this sort of interoperability between games and kind of an asset, it's like a currency, it's like a universal currency kind of thing. That's what
Yeah, yeah, and to expand on that a little bit, we don't see the current game landscape as what we want to capitalize on. It's really setting us up for the future of GameFi, where AAA games are building and they're managing their assets on chain instead of through their own siloed engine. So when that happens, it's going to be a significantly larger market. Um, these games right now are kind of pioneering the space, and they're setting us up for success. But a lot of them aren't built around lasting fun or lasting game economies, and so we're sort of waiting still. Oh.
Right. And there's always the endless debate between sort of playability versus earnability and
Yes.
where that. So if you were to take your crystal ball out and put us a couple of years into the future, like where do you see gaming going? Because I mean, at least from my vantage ground, the metaverse has kind of created this thing that says, hey, listen, we're post pandemic. Nobody goes to offices anymore. Nobody wants to go to offices anymore. What is work after all? You're like, I'm
Yeah.
playing a game. That
Right.
little documentary on Axie that, here was this village in the Philippines kind of ravaged by the pandemic, suddenly going, we got by doing this thing.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how sustainable that is, but it certainly makes you kind of scratch your head and go, what is a job anyways? And do I even do I need or want one?
Yeah. And
Um,
who's paying for all this?
right, and who is paying for all that?
Yeah.
I'm asking you. I mean, I know, but I don't know because I sometimes look and I go, listen, are these just heavily subsidized deals, where my favorite chain is going to give you some additional rewards to basically create kind of an incentivized liquidity pool that can pay me out over X amount of time. Now I'm hooked in by the game, but the money
Right.
goes away. How does
Right.
that what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a little bit of a pessimistic uh, view, but also realist. That I think you're right. It's you have to look at who values this game enough to pay for it after
Mm,
the rewards are gone. There has to be somebody that is actually interested in these items from a fun or other emotional connection aspect. And if there's not, then it is just a subsidized liquidity pool essentially that spurs use of a chain. Um, so you have to look for that. Like, is there somebody in this game that thinks it's fun enough to pay for it? And there was this tweet thread recently that I really resonated with, which was like, um, a lot of that value is coming from really developed countries where they don't want to put in the time, but they have the money, right? And so
mm,
if they have the money, they're willing to pay someone else to play it, and then they get whatever they like out of it. But at the end of the day, they're the ones paying for somebody else to get paid. And if you don't have somebody on that end that has the resources but not the time,
right.
it's just going to dry up. But you've seen that across game economies for a long time. Like, I played World of Warcraft and I bought gold, and who was supplying that gold? Somebody in a cheaper region who had time but not money, and they wanted to use their time to make gold for me. But it was because I wanted to play the game and I wanted that gold so that I could do something cooler in the game. Without that, you have a limited economy.
Right. So playability long term is going to make the difference. And then yeah, it's the time
Yeah,
versus money question.
right.
Which really does at a high level begin to think about leveling the playing field, right? If you're like somebody's like, yeah, I can go dig up the gold for you. I'll take my pick and shovel, presuming you have the money, which is of less value to, your time is
Yeah.
more valuable. And we just sit here and this is the arbitrage that takes place, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, long term, that's what sustains a game economy is
Uh,
somebody wanting that game asset to play with it, but not having the time.
and what are your in crypto thus far? What are the games you like? What do you think's coming? We see now kind of like Imperium Empire, something we launched is an impressive game. Corbata, of course, remarkably thoughtful, I think. And now we see like Ascenders, right? So you're starting to get this, and you go, well, there's a $200 billion industry right here that's not getting smaller, by the way. And it's kind of like we're going to take that value, put it on chain, and find a way to distribute it to users, right? You're like,
Yeah.
we're not shrinking the industry by doing this. So, on some level, you have to imagine that $200 billion is going to be redistributed in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing stuff here because this is new to me. You're in the space.
Yeah. Um, I mean, yeah, that's the whole point is redistributing it. And a lot of these games, like traditional games, have nothing to do with blockchain. They just don't allow for that redistribution. They have rules against it for whatever reason. They don't want it to be like play to win kind of mechanics, but they're holding that distribution in a smaller way with a lot of rules. And really, like, play to earn and metaverse has just opened eyes to the fact that if you actually just leave it wide open for the market to understand, you might actually be a lot better off than trying to narrow it in.
Well, and they're not suffering either. I mean, right now, the market is hot, and
Yeah.
you see these NFT sales on copper, and people are raising insane amounts of money. I'm skeptical of all that simply because this thing's going to cycle.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a rinse, and that's why something like Fief is of interest to me. Like the smart factions that kind of go our fingers on the pulse. We are looking for what's next, and that's why I just like to dig in the collective, uh, the collective brain power amongst you
Yeah.
guys.
There's one other thing I want to talk about that is
Yeah.
people are a little too focused on the GameFi that we have now and are ignoring the idea that any game in the world could use these same types of setups. And we're not talking about making thousands of dollars playing your mobile app, but even if it's a couple dollars, that is an economy enough to attract some people if you open it up. So like mobile publishers are going to be huge. Every mobile game out there uses some sort of token as a way to buy the next level or to unlock things, and just simply decentralizing that, putting it on chain, and then attaching it to protocols that are built for games. It's a huge opportunity.
How do you see something like Thief scaling, where I know you could get tons of player, tons of participants on board, a lot of NFTs minted, but in terms of kind of distilling information, keeping your finger on the pulse and remaining mobile, how do you kind of envision that?
It comes back to a little bit of centralization, a little
Hmm.
bit of hand choosing what we're putting out there. But we've started to build our Fief library as that base of knowledge, where we can put out thought leadership around what's happening in the market and help guide our guild members to some success. So that's really the main way we scale information. The protocols themselves obviously scale really well. I mean, once we have a protocol in place, um, trading can happen pretty seamlessly.
So IP is like a big part of this, if you think about it. Like just dating back. I'm old, as Mark is very quick to remind me whenever he gets a chance. You look at sort of intellectual property and you're like, a lot of times it's just methodologies and processes laid out. Do this, turn right, do that, do that, do that. If you guys build this library and you kind of, hone and refine it, and you kind of create this thing, that's sort of the secret sauce.
It is, but at this stage, we're thinking of it as a marketing and customer acquisition instead of the product. Um,
Hmm.
so if the product is the super scalable marketplace and we can draw users in by giving them free information that helps them generate yield or whatever for games, that's a win for us. And I don't see it being gated or something that we're selling for a while.
No, but it becomes part of the intrinsic value. If you
Yes.
think about tokens, in general, I mean, outside of here where there's actual earning capabilities, you kind of look, well, what is a token? You're like, well, you read these things like FANG, the Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, 80% of the value comes in their network. So I mean, to me, tokens are the monetization of network effects, right?
Yeah.
So on some level, like these kind of things that just sort of keep adding and make it more comprehensive, and kind of just finished, and ever evolving as sort of organisms. That's exciting because that's the kind of thing
Yeah.
you get a few years out with it, and suddenly you're like, no, this cannot be duplicated at any level.
Right.
This is
Right.
not a this is not a fork.
Right.
There's
No,
some,
there's
yeah.
nothing to fork there. Yeah. And I think what's really cool about it is that the community themselves have really they're so interested in GameFi that we're building this at the right time, essentially, because people are just flocking to the Discord and doing the research for us without significant rewards at this point, and they're just excited to contribute. So I think we come in at a great time to build a base like that. And then, of course, we can reward them more and more as protocols become productive.
Well, you got play to earn, you got learn to earn, you got
Yeah,
a lot of
right.
to earn.
Research to earn. Yeah,
Right, research to earn. That's
yeah,
pretty cool. What is when you guys got together however long ago and said we want to do this right, is there sort of do you sit there and map this out in terms of projections? These are the kind of returns we think we can gain. This is the kind of uh total, well, they're tools really. So you go, this is the kind of capital we could deploy across the ecosystem and generate X. Did you do any of that? Is that something like you would go iterate through?
Not me personally, so I can't speak to like the details, but we do model. And I think the unfortunate part of modeling in this early stage is that it changes so fast.
Yeah,
But
you're
yeah,
modeling uncharted waters, right?
right, right.
Yeah.
Uncharted waters, we haven't launched yet. Like there's a lot of factors that change, but of course, I think one of our core leaders comes from a fund background. So modeling is, second nature to him. And so we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see more on that, just how you come across. But obviously Axie is the kind of, the referential point that everyone looks at, says we're going to do this. Obviously you're making improvement. What do you think, like, where does that something like Axie go from here? Like, what makes it, what do you think's going to take something like this? Like, we have trillion-dollar companies out there. You're plugging into the world at large with a game, and there's certainly enough players to put. What makes an Axie or the next thing go to the next level? Like, what do you think are the missing pieces still, or things that yet to be realized?
Axe is doing a pretty good job. I mean,
Yeah.
they have tons of players. They've onboarded a significant number of people into crypto. So saying what's next is kind of like hard because they've already done so well. But I think it's continuing to build towards fun. A lot of what you see on Axie and on Krabata for Avalaunch is that the current game isn't finished. It's a work in progress, and they're
Mm.
constantly trying to add new fun opportunities that, yeah, they're still a little focused on yield, but they're also focused on fun and building an environment. So I think you have to just keep pushing towards fun and use the funds that you've already raised to make this thing like the game that people want to go and spend their time in, regardless of the income.
So Fief, without being a game, is kind of like a fun fund, right? I mean, is that kind of how you see it? Is
Uh,
that by design?
a fun fund?
Well, you're providing these tools, you're aggregating resources, you're still building an NFT.
Yeah.
You're gonna get a hatchet and so forth. That's fun. And there's yield involved, but it's not a game itself, right? So you just kind of go
We're
like,
gamifying aspects of it. It's like
right.
blood and coin is a game in itself. So I think the answer is that we want fun to be involved at every level possible. Um, so
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I was going. I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm thinking out loud. This is kind of like we're redefining work. I mean, that's just what it
yeah,
seems like to me,
yeah,
altogether. When Google put ping pong tables in their employee cafeterias, they kind of started in on that, and here we are 20 years later,
yeah,
doing it a whole lot better, I think. So that's cool.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, what is the game? Um,
It's really an economic game. So it's you've seen like token games across Avalanche. It's
sure.
in a similar way. It's an economic game where you want to come into it and focus on what can I do with these assets that might make them productive, and plug into the system. Try to play it a certain way. But I think the difference is that because our end goal is not the game itself, we're not going to let anyone like fall on their face and just
Mhm.
lose a ton of money on investing in or buying wood. It still comes back to starting the protocol use and getting people used to it. So the game is an economic game. It's strategic. It's reading. It's learning, and we see that people do have fun with that. Um, it's a different kind of fun, but it's fun via research, essentially, for this game.
Yeah, it's still, it's still work. I'm here to make
Yeah,
money, so let's not get it twisted, friend. It's
yeah.
right, right. So to me, I think, and I don't know if you have any comments on this, but excuse me. The difficulty with all this stuff is still just sort of onboarding somebody that just never dealt with this before.
Yeah.
Like you just, like I have friends and, like I'm old, obviously. And you go, well, how do I even explain to them? I'm just like, don't even ask me, man, bro. Like, let's just not. I live
Yeah.
in this stuff. I don't need to be explaining to you. Uh, what do you think is going to effectively sort of lower those kind of knowledge barriers to entry? Like nothing about crypto is what it appears to be at first glance. It's slightly counterintuitive until it's not, you
Yeah.
know. So even like with your thing, if I'm going to go explain it to somebody, it's not the easiest thing in the world, right?
Right. Right.
What do you think's going to kind of make that? Is just everybody got to get on a learning curve at some point, or is there a way to make this better?
I think there is a way, and it's going to come down to some games that are focused on the broader gaming audience, and that they create a wallet experience that isn't MetaMask or isn't, the dealing with your own custodial funds in a starting way. Like if they can onboard you into the game, give you some assets directly into a wallet, and start to kind of train you on how to use this,
Mm,
that in my opinion is going to lead adoption. And it's not going to be the games like us, like Blood and Coin isn't going to onboard the next billion users into crypto. It's a crypto game, and it's an
right.
economic game. But Ascenders or even an Imperium, someone that is focused on the game and allows a path for somebody to start without crypto, and then gives them the idea that, hey, this is cool, use it. I think that's the path for adoption.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think, yeah, Fief is always going to be, you need a yellow belt.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit of a yellow belt
Right,
scenario.
right, and you're going to get your white belt by going with one of these big AAA games. We're going to draw you into the rabbit hole, and you're never going to leave. And
Right.
before you know it, you're going to have an avatar on Twitter, and you're going to be saying all sorts of shit. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's just no way around that.
Yeah,
And there shouldn't be. Because I think also just in terms of people taking on risk, it's just
yeah.
there's yeah,
No, I,
you
I
know,
don't I don't want first time personally. I don't know if everyone will, crucify me for this, but I don't want first time crypto users really to come in and experiment with this. I don't want to create a bad experience where they didn't understand what they're getting into, or don't understand the strategy or how to use all of these tools. Um, I want this to be for people who have already been onboarded, but somebody else needs to do that part of like the fun onboarding.
yeah, I don't think you can't get crucified for that. No, I mean like what's funny is when you look at regulation, right? Like when I was involved in private equity, you just saw there's just all this paperwork to go through, and it's all under the guise of protecting investors. And I have news for you. Like gullible people have never fared too well in the world. And the same holds true in crypto. Like if you're dumb enough or just inexperienced, I guess we've all been dumb at some point. I'm dumb on a daily basis, but you go, those people who have lost money on some ridiculous token, many of them have found their way here. And it's kind of like, in the real world, there's been horrible deals all the time. And even at the highest levels where there's regulation out the wazoo, there's still a lot of people losing money. And we now have early stage companies as tradable assets in crypto. And guess what? There's volatility and people lose money. So that's just something that's life, man. And I just don't know why, they put a microscope on crypto that it's somehow this hotbed for wrongdoing. It's like, it's a reflection of everything else.
But yeah, I agree. I was trying to say that, went to Walmart and there was a giant lottery machine right next to the checkout. Like this is literally just throwing away money. Like why are we regulating crypto when this is allowed, or why don't we just allow all of it? Let people make their decisions.
Well, I think the world has to get to that place because despite the fact that crypto's hard to get into, nobody's excluded from jumping through all those hoops to get there. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Actually, at the highest level, you're like, guess what? Everyone has to learn to navigate the universe and realize that there's bad actors out there, and you know, regulation is not going to protect you from that.
Right.
End story.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not the fix.
right, right, and there's just no way. That's life, man. Like, give me a break.
Yeah, I agree.
But
And at the same time, I want to say, like, and game assets aren't going to all make you rich either. Like, it's something to be aware of.
well, if you look at the VC model, the VC model is basically like, listen, if we hit 2 out of 10, we're doing pretty good because the returns are outsized, right?
Yeah,
So we get into crypto, and there's just this insane expectation that everything's going to go 50 or 100x. It's like, well, you hope so, but you should also expect 8 out of 10 of them to fail. Like,
right.
what's going to be like? You have pre-seed funding companies that have tradable assets, right? You're like,
Yeah.
if you think about it, you're like, yeah, we kind of wrote something. Here's a website,
Yeah.
and we're on Uniswap.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, you're right. There could be the 1 in 10,000 that's going to run. But what's
Right.
amazing is crypto cycles so quickly that people forget. Like 90% of the DeFi summer tokens are gone. Even some of the good ones. Even some of the pretty well capitalized. We made the partnership. We built on the right chain, but we just lost all interest. We're done.
Yep.
And nobody remembers them anymore. And that's
Yep.
why I think what you guys are doing is interesting to me, because if you get, and I mean this in an entirely complimentary way, but if you get some real degens on board, right? If you're like, we live, eat, and breathe this space, and we just sort of like are just constantly trying to play, the information arbitrage. What's
Yeah.
coming? What's next? I heard this thing. If you can stick USDT, like if you were able to put USDTE in AVAX, how 6 months ago, it was like 50%, for
Yeah.
like a while. Anybody that can identify that but has the mobility to kind of deploy, pull, and go elsewhere is way ahead of the game. I mean, that's what everybody's in crypto for, right?
Yeah.
Like we're in Slacks, Discord, WeChat, Twitter, hoping to find these little bits of information that can lead us there. So now if you've
Right.
aggregated a few guys that can do that or do their best to do that, and they attract you've got something pretty potent there. And I think that's kind of what you're going after, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's just the monetization is on the protocols themselves, but that is like the core part of the product.
It's very cool.
GameFi Alpha.
And it is ever evolving, I have to say. Like week to week, you guys put up new stuff. So
Yes.
it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, my man, I appreciate your time. I think we got everything we need here. This is enlightening, and I think I actually finally understand
Nice.
what you're doing, and by next Tuesday I might not. So I'll try to stay up to speed.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dave.
Good stuff. Thanks, Coop.
Yeah.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.